Coming up, Tom Jolliffe from Flickering Myth and also screenwriter, whose upcoming film Cinderella's Revenge will be out late April. He's going to be on. We're going to be talking about the Dolph film Army of One, aka The Joshua Tree. And then we've got a great month for you lined up here. Next week we've got Sean Malloy from I Must Break This Podcast. He'll be on to talk about the Van Damme film Replicant. And then Rich Haas from DTV Digest, he'll be on to talk two Daniels PM classics. We'll be looking at Rage and Recoil. And then we finish off the month with Ty from Comeuppance, as we'll be looking at Operation Black Ops and Hollow Point, Daniels' early film from 2019. In terms of the blog, Saturday, we're going to look to get Cynthia Rothrock back up. So looking at City Cops, which is on Tubi, so I've started watching that one. That'll be the review then. And then we'll kind of finish off the month. I'm not sure exactly what the order will be. It would probably be Shannon Tweed film, Codename Vengeance, Albert Pion film, Left for Dead, I believe is the name of it. Also Phoenix, another Daniels Literally film that Ty and I did on a previous podcast, so we'll be looking to do that. And then in terms of me cleaning up those Matt Movie Guy links, almost through, I think, 2011. So then just have to do 2010 and we'll get there. So I'm going to kind of keep cruising through that and hopefully get all of those out of there so that whenever you're clicking on a post, you don't have to worry about clicking on a link that could take you to give you a virus or do whatever it could. So hopefully over the next week and a half, we'll have that all cleaned up. But yeah, that is pretty much everything. I figure we'll do a quick opening this week so we can get right into the Dolph Lundgren action. So why don't we take a pause here? We'll have our theme song here. And then when we come back, Tom Jolliffe, we're talking about Army of One, aka The Joshua Tree. All right, we are back, and I am joined once again by screenwriter Tom Jolliffe. Welcome back, Tom.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, now the last time you were on, we talked about Cypher, which was a really cool movie with Lucy Liu and Jeremy Northam. And at that time, we were also talking about the newest project that you're working on, The Baby in the Basket. So, yeah, how are things going with that?
Yeah, really good. I think probably the last time we were probably building up towards the shoot itself. So we've now been through the shoot, had a couple of reshoots as well because we lost a day due to a storm. So we had to go back and do that again. But yeah, it's in post-production now. We've had kind of like the first rough assembly cut, and that was really kind of pleasing to see. Everything's kind of like falling into place. So yeah, now it's just off to all the post-production departments. So we'll get the sound, picture kind of perfected, and then obviously the score as well. So yeah, making good progress at the moment.
Excellent. Yeah, so it sounds exciting. I'm trying to think, like when you were on to do When Darkness Falls, that was already a completed picture, I believe. So we were we were in this process of kind of knowing what was happening as you're going through it.
Yeah, it's it could be a lengthy process sometimes. I mean, the whole thing started probably back maybe the first half of 2022. So we're creeping up to 2 years since like the idea kind of first formed, and now we're kind of just starting the post-production process really. So yeah, we got close to the final cut, which is coming quite soon, and then it's just a case of fine-tuning and then adding all the flourishes like the score and the sound.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I think you and Nathan were on back in April of last year. So for people listening, that's episode 122 in the archives, where you came out to talk about the project at that point. So then I think you just sort of
Yeah, yeah, I think you had it written, and I think you'd had like the locations, and I don't even know if you had the full cast at that point.
We were probably close to kind of finalizing it back then. There was a couple of like chops and changes we needed to make, and then with the we had a couple of issues with the SAG strikes out in America and the WGA strikes as well. Although we're not kind of anything affiliated with those, because we're in an independent production, you still kind of get a little bit of a, a runoff effect really. One actress we had cast at one point um, was due to be in our film, but also due to be in another film that was kind of a SAG production, and that was getting pushed back, and then kind of overlapping into where we were looking to film. Um, and the kind of budget level that we're at, you kind of find your window, you book everything in, you can't really change it or chop and change too much. So yeah, we unfortunately had to recast that role, but then we reshaped the role slightly anyway, and went in a different direction, and I think it's going to work out really well.
That's really interesting because I read about that with Marvel running into that issue where a
Yeah.
lot of their projects were pushed back, and then like the stars that they want to get for those movies, they between like the SAG delays and then of course development delays that they've been running into where they've been wanting to rewrite them and those things, they start to push up against other projects that these actors have, and then they lose them and have to recast those roles. So yeah, it's interesting. Read about it from like a Marvel thing, just sort of like a clickbait article on my computer at work when I'm supposed waiting for a process to load or something like that. But it's a similar situation though, where they still have those kind of knock-on effects, whether you're a small indie film or a huge big budget Marvel production.
Yeah, I mean, we never really even expected something like that to affect us, really, because we're a small independent production over in the UK. So yeah, we didn't really expect that kind of runoff, and also there were one or two actresses we kind of looked at for, um, I guess, a particular role. Um, but we ended up looking at maybe a couple of actresses stateside who would have been SAG actresses, and then it just didn't seem right to kind of make those approaches. So yeah, we kind of went in a different direction, and I think in the end it's worked out really well. I mean, just from what I've seen with the initial cut we have so far, all the performances are really really good. So we can't wait to kind of get it finished and get it out there.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it. I know some of the cast that you have involved. I remember them from When Darkness Falls. So like you know uh, Michaela Longden, Ella O'Hara. They I remember them. Of course Nathan, who's he he was directing and producing, and obviously that's he was in When Darkness Falls as well. But yeah, so kind of excited to see some of those names, but then also like Mariam Dabo or Paul Barber, some names that I recognize to see them as well.
Yes, yeah, we're hoping they bring a few eyes to the project as well. Yeah, so we're going to hopefully, it'll be a very tight push, but we're going to hopefully take it to Cannes, and then yeah, ideally we'd like to take it there because the next market kind of after that is getting towards the end of the year. So yeah, we'd really kind of like to get it ready for Cannes. Um, but we'll be sort of actively sort of pitching it around anyway quite soon. And see how we go. We're just really excited to get the film out, and really hopefully we'll attach it to the right kind of distributor that we really need to make the best of the film.
No, when you take it to Cannes, that's the idea, is that you're trying to sell it to distributors that you'll kind of get it to as many markets as possible.
Yeah, I mean, we'll sort of do the rounds with it, I guess you can say. We've had a lot of interest in it already, really. A lot of people have been inquiring about the film, and have quite a few distributors already. Um, but yeah, we're sort of keeping our options open. We have like a sort of tier of maybe two or three that we'd really like to kind of hopefully attach it to. So yeah, we're gonna we'll do our best and hopefully get the right distribution deal, and hopefully uh, end of this year, maybe early next year. Hopefully the film will be out.
Excellent. That's really exciting. Yeah, yeah. The whole even like the idea of con, that just sounds so cool. And I guess it's got to be interesting in your case where you're on the French Riviera, but you've got to work as well. So it's like probably it sounds so like luxurious, but and so like nice and all that, but really it's kind of more work in your case, right? Because it can kind of make or break your film.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Nathan works in distribution anyway, so he's going to be there, kind of on the front lines. But I mean, he's been to a few markets already, and it basically is that you're working so often, you almost don't get a chance to go out and see the kind of the locations unless you kind of book a day either side. Um, so yeah, it's a lot of hard work, but ultimately, hopefully, it'll be rewarding.
Yeah, I always one of the things I always kind of remember is with Fred Williamson is that he would sometimes he didn't even have a fully finished film, but he would go to con with like the idea of a movie and just
Yeah.
sort of hustle his way to sell. And so a lot of those projects that we know from like the 80s, that of his, those sort of those actioners set either in Europe or Chicago. That was how he went there with nothing and just said, "I've got this idea for a movie," and he just on his own kind of charisma and everything he would sell those. But kind of sounds like a similar deal where he's just working the whole time and trying to get the right situation.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean that way used to be quite common. I think you still sometimes get it, but not quite as much. You have to have things maybe a little bit more formed by that point. By the time you start trying to throw it around, have investors in place already. Um, but yeah, sort of 10, 20 years ago, even you could just go with a poster and someone's face on it and say, "Look, this is the film we want to make," and then it snowballs from there.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the big differences now where because investors are a little bit more hesitant. Like you've got these other avenues like Indiegogo, and crowdfunding where excuse me, you can get the film made with those, and then like you said, let's sort of take that finished product to the distributors and see what kind of deals you can get.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you kind of have the knack for it, it can be a useful tool using crowdfunding. I mean, it's not something that we would probably look to do again. I think it's kind of, with in terms of the baby in the basket, when we crowdfunded that, it was really kind of like a one and done. Um, so yeah, I mean, we've got baby in the basket in post at the moment, but we're already starting to develop the next thing as well. So that's all at that process of seeking investors, and we're just starting the ball rolling on that one for the next thing.
Yeah, now with When Darkness Falls, was that one that wasn't that was one that you kind of just did on your own as well, right? That wasn't one where
Yeah,
that you didn't there was no crowdfunding or anything for that one.
no, that was kind of like, well, Nathan self-funded that one, and that was kind of like finished and then kind of taken to market to find a distributor.
Yeah, and that's one that is available because I think when I'm trying to remember when we last spoke, when you were on in September when we did Cypher, I was trying to remember. I think When Darkness Falls was available in the UK at that point, because I know initially it wasn't.
Yeah, I think it was around about September it came out in the UK. So yep, still there in the UK, and it's doing quite well by the look of it. We've had some quite good placement on Amazon anyway, so hopefully that bodes well.
Yeah, and here in the States, I mean, I think I can't remember now. Now it's been a while since you were on to discuss that movie. But actually, when we had Nathan on as well in April of last year, we discussed When Darkness Falls and Baby in the Basket. So for people that are more curious about that, they can definitely go back to that episode. But here in the States, that one's available on a lot of free streamers, so Freevee, Peacock, Roku Channel, Tubi. And Freeview, of course, is the one that's attached. It's like the free version of Amazon Prime. So yeah, for people listening, while we're waiting for Baby in the Basket to come out, When Darkness Falls is definitely worth checking out. I think that was in talking with you about that one in 2022, I think that was one of my favorite movies that I saw that year. And it's really, really great, kind of slow burn thriller, really great performances, but the sets, shooting, all of that was really fantastic.
Yeah, we've been really pleased so far with how it's gone. It's sort of strange sometimes with those platforms, because a few of them kind of got released simultaneously, and a few of them kind of got staggered releases. But we had a little period where it did really well on Vudu, and then it had a period where it did well on Tubi, and then more recently it seems to have picked up quite well on Peacock. So it's almost like these little cycles, where it just has sparks into life again.
Yeah, and Peacock's an interesting one here in the States because it I don't know if I don't know that it had like a growth of subscribers, but I think it might have had a growth of like I don't know what the right word is, maybe recognition or something. So one of the NFL playoff games was streamed exclusively on Peacock, and so the game didn't do as great ratings wise as like the ones that are on broadcast television, but I think it did like show more people because one of the things is it's attached to one of the major cable companies here in the United States, Comcast or Xfinity, and I think there were a lot of people who didn't even realize they had Peacock, who because it was because it's the same company. I don't know exactly how it works, but I know in my case, because we spend so much on cable every month, we get it included. And so, but
Yeah.
I kind of already knew because the English Premier League is on there. So if I'm watching, and then also the Bravo reality show. So my wife and I'll do like Real Housewives of New Jersey on there as well. So that's how I kind of knew of the existence of Peacock. But I think there were a lot of Americans who discovered that Peacock existed, and I think they either upped their subscribers or people had a subscription they didn't even know they were using. And I would imagine that as people when people discover a new streaming service like that, they start kind of paging through it and see movies that interest them. And of course, yeah, When Darkness Falls would have been one that would have been included in a maybe a free with or like an advertising package. So that's actually really cool. I never even thought of that. Yeah, that, but and it may have coincided because I think that game happened about a month ago. So it maybe even kind of coincided with that.
Yeah, I mean, it could possibly be that. Yeah, it's just everyone kind of has each streaming channel has their own kind of unique set of content, I guess. Um, so it can just depend on where you kind of get placed. Uh, I think in terms of what's happened with Peacock recently for the film, anyway, we've seemed to have had a lot between Peacock and then the UK release. It seems to have had a bit of a boost, just in terms of sort of eyes on it. And it shot right up probably to its highest peak on IMDb in terms of the star ranking. I think it ended up getting into the top 5,000, probably based off the UK release, and then kind of having a little surge on Peacock.
Oh, yeah. That's what it's interesting. I never really think of the IMDb ratings. Sometimes I'll look at the IMDb ratings, like for example, if like I watch a movie and I did it didn't really resonate with me. Sometimes I'll go through the user reviews and see like was there something I missed or something like that. But yeah, I never really thought of that because it always prompts me to review it. I generally don't give a rating because I review on my site. But yeah, I never really considered that yeah, like depending on who's watching, they go to IMDb. You want to maybe learn more about the filmmakers or the actors that they saw in the film, and IMDb prompts them to prompt you to give a star rating right away there. That yeah, as people see it, they'll start kind of giving it those ratings when they log in.
Yeah, it's a bit of a funny one with IMDb, really, because they have their own weighted average, really. Um, so it doesn't really always bear kind of a relation to the actual mathematical average. Yeah, I don't know how they kind of work their things up. It just they seem to have a sort of natural bias against, I don't know, indie kind of projects and micro budget projects from certain countries as well. So there seems to be like a ceiling really of a rating you can get in terms of like your out of 10 rating. So yeah, it can be a little bit frustrating because sometimes IMDb can kind of snap a finger and then drop the rating on a film, in the kind of like the blink of an eye, which it can become a little bit frustrating for indie filmmakers. I know that. So yeah, because some fans do kind of look at the ratings and will kind of dismiss a film if it's got a low rating, but it doesn't always kind of bear a resemblance to what the actual average or mathematical average would be anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense because I almost feel because one of the things I've noticed with especially with indie or low budget films is that there's almost a sense that some people feel like that the people who make the movie or who are related to people who make the movie give the movie a 10 because they want to help out friends or family or something like that, and that there's this other crusade of reviewers who feel like they have to give the movie a really low rating to like balance that out or something. And I wonder if that's also IMDb's part of it, is they feel like, oh, people that are connected with the film are just going to give it a whole bunch of tens, and we want to uh, uh, bring that down. But I've never really seen it be like such a huge issue that it would need to be like accounted for, corrected, or something like that. I think it's more of a myth that kind of thing
Yeah,
happens. It's like
yeah,
like people think it happens with restaurants and stuff like that too. And I think the ratings are usually, I would say they're right because again, like you said, IMDb corrects for it, but I don't think IMDb probably needs to correct for it. I don't think it's as big of an issue as people think it is.
no, I mean it just doesn't always make sense to me when you see maybe a film might have 2 or 3 out of 10 on its IMDb rating, but then you look at the average and it's more like 5 or 6.
Yeah.
So sometimes the drops can be quite severe, but it seems to me like they'll kind of, if they suspect there's been a disproportionate amount of tens, for example, they'll kind of bring it down.
Yeah.
But the reverse isn't always true. If you see a massive amount of 1 out of 10s.
Yeah.
It's difficult because IMDb or Amazon own IMDb, and then there's other reasons why they might kind of change ratings as well.
Yeah, that makes sense too. I never even thought of that with Amazon because I think like Amazon has their own. I know Jay Horton, who we've talked about on here before, who does like his different uh, uh, YouTube videos about kind of the film industry and sort of indie filmmakers getting their own movies out. And I think he was talking about how with Amazon, like there are a lot of factors that go into um, how they rate or how they even compensate a movie. And one of them is like how many people watch a movie on Amazon Prime and then stick around and buy something. And I wonder too if that even factors in because they, like you said, they own IMDb, how the ratings go as well. That like if they can push you to Amazon Prime to watch a movie and buy something, right? That it almost like rates a movie higher. I wonder.
Yeah, I mean, it could be that. Yeah, it's just one of those things where you just don't really know the reasoning behind it. Um, yeah, it can be disheartening for sort of, I know, filmmakers that are making kind of really low budget films and trying to hope to get some recognition, but then in the blink of an eye, your rating can kind of drop right down. So yeah, it can be difficult. I think there's also certainly there's factors like in terms of Amazon picking up your film or the placement that they have in the film. So to kind of get onto Amazon, sometimes they might not look at a film that's below a certain rating. So if they kind of cut the rating down, effectively they can decide not to pick it up. Yeah, small factors like that, really. So, it is what it is, but it tends to even things out overall. So, the other ratings, like the Amazon ratings or Letterbox, they tend to be a bit fairer, it seems.
Yeah, no, that's a good point as well. That like, I know like if I look at a movie on Letterboxd, and again, I don't usually rate on Letterboxd either because it's the mindset is people come to my site. So, but maybe I should start doing those kinds of things, especially with movies like yours, where sort of every kind of bit of support can help with those because yeah, I find like for example, like with When Darkness Falls, like of course that was you came to me to see if we could discuss it on the podcast here. But also, it's like the kind of movie where if you go just by the number rating versus if you click on the critic reviews and look through some of those, even when the critic reviews are negative on a movie, you get a fuller scope of what the movie's about. I think a lot of times,
Yeah.
yes, some critic reviews are bad, but you get a better idea versus just a sort of an overall number.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, it would be nice if people kind of did look a little bit deeper, or if they looked into, because you can see the breakdown on every kind of rating, so you can kind of see what the mathematical rating is compared to IMDb's rating, and you can see kind of like a breakdown of how many people have rated, 5, 6, or whatever out of 10. But yeah, we've got all our critic reviews on there, and especially when we kind of had the US release, we had a really good response. Yeah, from critics.
Yeah, and I mean, because it is, from that perspective, as someone, sort of watching it from that perspective, it there's so much great in it, and I think it is interesting to know, because again, like I've never really looked at that IMDb number before. The only time I ever even think about the IMDb number actually is another podcast. Will from Exploding Helicopter, at his podcast, when he discusses a movie, he'll mention the Rotten Tomatoes score and the IMDb user rating number. And I never really think of that user rating number, because it just, in my mind, I always feel like with and I didn't really know this about them, sort of how they sort of artificially deduct that score. I've just always just known that it seems like lower budget indie films get lower scores. That it seems like, and I guess I always thought it was just like a group of users that always created those movies much more harshly. You'll see
Yeah,
a review where someone's like, oh, I really enjoyed this movie, but still give it a 4 out of 10, and it's like, well, you really enjoyed it, but you gave it a 4 out of 10. That seems kind of
I've had a few
harsh.
of those reviews. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's always why I've always looked at that number and said, okay, I'm not really going to pay attention to it, because I don't really know what criteria people are even using when they give a movie a score. But it's interesting. I didn't even realize that they have their own sort of corrective math that they use to lower or raise a score as well.
Yeah, I mean they do, but it's one of those things. It's like KFC. It's a secret recipe, so
Right.
they'll never tell you exactly what it is. But yeah, so I mean, effectively they can make up any score they like. But it's weird. There's so many different channels, so many different things with kind of user ratings. Yeah, there's a big differential. You see it on any film really. There's big differentials usually between different platforms, but yeah, it is what it is. But if people like it, I think the other thing is, if people kind of don't like a film, they're more inclined to just go straight to the 1 rating, for whatever reason, just put that in. If they kind of, if they like a film, they're less inclined to go on and kind of vote and give it a score. I think that's just generally across the board, really, particularly with sort of indie films where you don't have that natural kind of established fan base, where if it's a Marvel film, for example, everyone will kind of naturally run on to give their rating.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense as well, because you're right. Like, there's almost this sense that, like, for people who don't like a movie, right, they feel like they've got to tell someone. It's
Yeah.
almost like it was like an affront to them personally that the movie wasn't good, which is an interesting concept. But and like I said, there also seems to be this idea that, like, if somebody really doesn't like a movie and they see other people giving it a 10 on IMDb, they almost feel like it's like their good deed for the day to tell everybody that they hated it. And it's almost like they feel like they're doing this, like they're on this crusade or something, which I think makes it even worse, because it's like, yeah, if somebody else is giving it a 10, it has nothing to do with the person watching it who doesn't like it giving it a 1. Like, there's no need for that absolute counterbalance. But you're right. There's this sense that when people don't like a movie, they almost feel like they were personally insulted, and they have to go on IMDb or wherever and give a low score.
Yeah, maybe it's just the natural leading to a more negative outlook, I guess. Um, it's weird though, because historically it used to be that you'd get kind of nicer reviews on maybe IMDb for things, and then if you went and saw maybe a film on YouTube or the trailer on YouTube, the comments would be mostly kind of, negative, because it's so easy, quick and easy to do a YouTube comment, maybe in comparison to dropping a review on IMDb. But generally, it seems to have flipped now, where I seem to, on my films at least, I seem to get a lot more positive comments on YouTube rather than IMDb. It seems to have been like a weird role reversal.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I know with IMDb, I know back in like the 2000s when IMDb was growing into becoming that kind of that number one source for film information. I don't remember if I ever wrote any reviews on there, but I know some of the other movie bloggers, like for example like Ty from Comeuppance. He would write reviews on IMDb, and then he moved over to Blogger. And I think that was one of those things. I think a lot of people that wrote kind of
Yeah,
more thoughtful reviews, they realize like, oh, I can just make my own site, and then IMDb will link it. And I know that's kind of a similar situation for me, where it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to write the review on my site, and then IMDb will link it in the critic reviews. So then what you get is like, I think, fewer thoughtful reviews on IMDb, and it is just mostly people that have an axe to grind for whatever reason. They took it personally, the movie, that they didn't like the movie. And then, like you said, sometimes you get people who've had a part in making the movie. I know, like, there's one that Don the Dragon Wilson did where he gave it a 10 out of 10 on IMDb, talking about how much he really enjoyed working on it. And I think that's what it is. I think someone
yeah,
sees something like that and they think, no, this movie was horrible. What is Don the Dragon Wilson talking about? I've got to put a 1 out of 10 to even that out or something. And yeah, and then I think for people out there maybe who are listening who are inclined to do that, just know that IMDb has its own sort of like corrective algorithm that it does as well, where if it thinks there's too many 10 out of 10s, it will sort of knock the score down on top of that, which can make it even lower.
yeah. It's just one of those weird things, really. I think every channel has their own way of working, um, and there's yeah. I think Letterboxd has kind of become almost what IMDb used to be. It's almost I guess you get quite. It's small and quite niche at the moment, but people sort of enjoy ranking and reviewing films. It's sometimes a little bit more in depth, but it's quite easy just to drop a rating and like a one sentence on something. Um, yeah, so I don't know in terms of like user reviews, at least, whether people have kind of abandoned IMDb somewhat. Certainly, I've not. I don't think I've dropped a review on IMDb for maybe 15 years or so, 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the last time it had been about that long for me, maybe even longer. But then I did do an indie review for a film, and the filmmaker asked if I could go on IMDb and give a review there. And even though I'd written my review on my site, and I was like, okay, yeah, I can do that. And actually, I don't know if it was there or Letterbox, one of those two places, but they wanted, because like I said, usually I don't post reviews there. I post them on my site. But I think that was the last time I did something like that too, as well. And so, yeah, it's not common anymore, right? Like you said, and I think that might also affect what people are seeing on there, because on the one hand, you get people who are prompted when they log into IMDb and they look at the page and it says, "Hey, if you watch this movie, give it a rating." And maybe they give it a rating, maybe they don't. I think the other thing too, I think for people that like a movie, is they go to IMDb because they want to know more about, like, okay, who's that actor that I just saw that was like the lead, and they want to know more about that person. What other films have they been in? And they get this pop up saying, "Hey, can you rate the movie?" And they just exit out because they're kind of on a mission to, you know, they have a purpose, right, to do
Yeah,
something. Whereas the people who hate the movie, they don't really care who was in it. They don't want to know more about who's in it. So then when they get the prompt, the first thing they're going to do is hit that 1 star button and then write their review. So that's another piece that I never really considered before, but also would explain why not as many good reviews come up, because people are going to IMDb with a purpose when they like a movie, because they want to learn more about who was involved. And so that pop-up is more of a hindrance than it is something that they're going to be excited to kind of give a score for.
yeah. I think that's it, really.
Yeah, so that's, but I think for people listening, yeah, definitely do not worry about the IMDb star rating for When Darkness Falls. It is definitely and it's not like a really really low rating, but it's not, it people shouldn't look at it and be like, oh, okay, well that's what people are giving. I think it's a really really fantastic film. Like we've talked about it before on here, but here in the States and in the UK, you can get it, you can stream it for free, and I think it's worth checking out. It's it's unique in the sense that we don't get as many kind of slow burn movies as we used to, but this one, it really develops really well, and I think that's a key with a slow burner that. If you trust it for that first, half hour, there's still enough intrigue in the early parts of the film, I think, to keep people involved. And but yeah, as it goes on, it just really fantastic the way that the story plays out.
Yeah, well, I hope people will check it out.
Yeah, definitely. Now,
Yeah.
now, speaking of movies, that for checking out, I think the one we're going to be discussing here today, the Joshua Tree, aka Army of One. So it's is it in the UK? Is it the Joshua Tree or is it Army of One there?
Yeah, it was Joshua Tree in the UK.
So interesting.
Yeah.
Here in the U.S., it was originally Joshua Tree, and then they changed it to Army of One because they didn't want it confused with the U2 album, which. I mean, this movie came out in '93. The U2 album would have been in the late '80s, but I think it was
Yeah.
because U2. I don't know if I think that would have been a little late for Rattle and Hum. Maybe it was Octung Baby. Um, I think U2 had a big album out in the early '90s, and U2 is one of those
Yeah.
groups that was like whenever they had an album out and they got new fans, those new fans went and just bought up everything. And so that might have been what the issue was that the Joshua Tree was charting again, and they didn't want, but for whatever reason, that's why they changed the name here in the U.S. to Army of One, which actually makes it a little bit harder to look up because Army of One has all kinds of other, plenty of other movies with that title versus the Joshua Tree.
Yeah, it was a bit of an odd one to me. I mean, to me, I always knew it as Joshua Tree when I used to sort of rent it from my local video shop.
Yeah, and it's not like U2 was any less popular in the UK versus in the US. So it is interesting that people were worried
Yeah.
about it here, but and I don't know. Yeah, I did. It's always interesting. We're talking about film distributors, and it's like always interesting, kind of what the decisions are in terms of like, um, yeah, making changes to the name or that kind of thing.
Yeah, it doesn't often make that much sense. I guess maybe from the US point of view, they wanted something a bit more that's suggestive of action, really. Joshua Tree is a little bit vague, so you might not necessarily immediately think action. Although, you would just have to look at the cover, really. I think most of them, some of the cover artwork had Dolph with, Ferrari behind him. Some of them had him with a shotgun, I think, if I remember correctly. So, and obviously Dolph himself is kind of suggestive of action.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, this would have been around the time of Universal Soldier. I think it would have been like I think
Yeah,
yeah, it was like because I mean, this movie was intended to be released theatrically here in the U.S. And it's for whatever reason that didn't end up happening. It was released theatrically overseas, I think, because Dolph still had a pretty big following overseas at that time. But here in the U.S. And I guess like Canada, I don't know if, and I think in the UK as well. I think the UK was direct to video as well.
yeah. Direct to video in the UK, I believe. I know that in parts of Europe it got theatrically released as well. Did quite well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one when you look at Dolph's filmography because yeah, again, it was the film that he did after Universal Soldier, and so it's kind of like the sort of up and down kind of thing that he had, where Masters of the Universe it was big, but it was kind of also a flop. Like it wasn't, what people, wasn't the kind of make or break kind of movie or the kind of thing that was going to break it. I think it didn't break him the way he was expecting it to. No pun intended with him as Ivan Drago, but then Red Scorpion, it also didn't do as well, and The Punisher, of course, didn't make it into the theaters like everybody was expecting it to. So he'd had these kind of misses. Shut Down a Little Tokyo was another one that I think again was expected to be a big budget film, and it was released in the theater theatrically to some extent. So he had like these misses, and then Universal Soldier was big, but I guess because it was considered more of a Van Damme movie. But I think Joshua Tree was going to be that follow up that was going to keep him there. But just from there it was pretty much all in direct to video. I mean, he had the small part in Johnny Mnemonic, but for the most part, after uh, Universal Soldier, it's kind of there. But one of the things I think about Joshua Tree, because it it was kind of on the cusp of being a theatrical release here in the US and in the UK and Canada, but wasn't quite there. It is a little bit higher quality than most direct-to-video movies, especially direct-to-video movies today. And so I think that's one of the areas where it looks a little bit nicer and feels a little bit nicer versus what you usually see for direct-to-video, especially from that period.
Yeah, definitely. I think you can kind of see there's an ambition there, really. I think, Dolph had just come off a hit movie. Like you say, it kind of did more for Van Damme than him. In theory, he's always been a little bit unlucky in terms of, the big project that's meant to kind of launch him again. Kind of, there's all different things that kind of went wrong. Like there was a company collapse with the Punisher, which kind of affected their ability to have a US theatrical release. That could have been more of a kind of launch pad for him at that time. It's kind of never quite worked out in terms of his kind of solo leading man films. He's never really found the right, I guess, distributor for one reason or another. It can just be, companies kind of folding at the wrong time, or they just, I think it was it Warner Brothers maybe that did Showdown in Little Tokyo. I think they kind of pushed it a little bit back to what it could have been, and I know it kind of got a little bit swallowed up by Terminator 2 when that came out. So it's been luck sometimes, and it just, some films that probably deserve to take off a bit more didn't quite take off to where the level they could have.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it's like, he had obviously had like the biggest start, right, with Rocky 4. And
Yeah.
there was a sense of like, oh, he's just going to keep going from there. And I'm sure he probably thought the same thing. And the next movie is Masters of the Universe. And unfortunately, it was like one of the movies that brought Cannon down. It's like that one and Superman 4. And so for him, I mean, if you go on YouTube, you can see the Macy's Day Thanksgiving Day Parade. It's just a huge parade in New York City here in America. He was there. He's got like his ponytail, and he's like, there performing. Or I guess they had somebody else performing as He-Man. They had like a He-Man float, but then he was being interviewed there. So it's kind of like as big as you can get at that point. And I think there's probably that sense that it's just going to keep going. But then when that movie doesn't do as well, suddenly, the calculus changes. Like you said, the Punisher. I mean, it's an interesting thing when you think about Marvel movies. I mean, Howard the Duck was like their only real big screen theatrical release until Blade comes out. But then they had these misses in between, and the Punisher was one of them. And it's like, unfortunately for Dolph, right, that movie that was again supposed to break him into the market, ends up being a direct-to-video release. And like you said, with Showdown in Little Tokyo, I mean, so when you look at that cast, you think like, okay, that should have been a bigger release. But like you said, it was like it got a theatrical release here in the States, but they kind of focused more of their efforts on Terminator 3, which, I mean, once that thing came out, it was such a huge blockbuster that they kind of put everything behind it. There are video games and drinks and like fast food tie-ins, all that kind of stuff. Which for a movie of like Terminator 2, to have that kind of merchandising was interesting at that time.
Yeah, definitely, and particularly for something that was an R-rated movie as well. It just became this kind of like this behemoth. And I think, in terms of like Showdown at Little Tokyo, I mean, that's like a 75-minute movie. And I don't know if that's entirely intentional, whether the studio have come in and kind of cut it down right to the bone. In terms of maybe not having that much belief in the project. But yeah, I think, a lot of these films as well, because Dolph was so successful on video, at a certain point, they look at it and they look at the box office returns, and then they look at the VHS rentals, and it kind of makes more logical sense to then shift into becoming, a direct-to-video star.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And yeah, with Mark L. Lester, he the movie was supposed to be 90 minutes, and I guess Warner, they didn't like the test screenings. I guess when and I don't know who they got to test screening, because this is like it's one of my all-time favorite. Of course, I was like, it came out in 91, so I was like, or 90, 91, so I was like, 11, 12 years old. So of course my friends and I at that time, we thought that movie was fantastic. It was like one of our favorites. But I guess, yeah, that the studio didn't like, I guess, Warner Brothers didn't like the results, and so they cut the film down, and then yeah, it didn't really support the movie. So yeah, so it didn't do as well. But yeah, that's a good point, that I think, like, from a direct to video standpoint, especially here in America with cable, that companies like HBO, because I think the Joshua Tree was direct to HBO. I think that's how it was premiered. Those channels had a lot of programming that they needed to fill, and I know one of the knocks on HBO when I was growing up, because we would get like the free HBO weekends, and my mom would be like, "Well, I don't want to pay extra for HBO because they seem to have the same movies." And it was like, when you do those, like those free weekends, they'd kind of cycle through the newest releases and play them 3 or 4 times a day. But they could only do that so much, and so they needed content. And a lot of times they'd have like erotic thrillers late at night, but a movie like an Army of One, slash Joshua Tree, would be perfect for, like, more daytime viewing. And so yeah, and so I think it's the thing with Dolph, is that he got kind of in that category, which for other ones, like, like a Don the Dragon Wilson or a Cynthia Rothrock, who hadn't had big budget success, it made a little bit more sense. But in his case, it was almost like they were like selling Ivan Drago to people, looking through their TV guide, or at the video store seeing him on the cover.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in terms of like being that kind of straight to cable, straight to video kind of star, I mean, there was a little period where he was probably the cream of the crop, really, until kind of Van Damme and Seagal dropped down and joined him.
Yeah, and like I said, yeah, with this movie, it was an HBO premiere here in the States, in February, and then later that year, in like October, it gets its video premiere. Which at the same time, that was when the UK, they both, or actually no, the UK was the year before, in '93. But yeah, it's like that period in the late '90s, early 2000s, when the bigger names start to drop down to direct to video. That's when he starts doing movies like Detention, or Retrograde, which he did with Gary Daniels. And at that point, he's kind of looking at these roles and thinking, like, I need to maybe make my own movies. And that's when he starts directing, and you get like, The Defender, A Command Performance, those movies into the late 2000s. And of course, like you were talking about, like, he's never really had like the big budget success for like the leading man roles. But with the Expendables in 2010, he does reassert himself in the zeitgeist as someone who could do guest spots on TV shows, or uh, you know, uh, have smaller parts in big budget films like Aquaman and things like that. So he at least had a little bit of a renaissance there from Expendables, but yet he never quite got that big screen leading man career that I think was projected for him when he did Rocky IV.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and I think also, at least in terms in comparison to maybe guys like Seagal and Van Damme, he seemed to be a little bit more willing to kind of push the boat out and maybe do something a little bit different. You get something like Cover Up, which is this kind of like conspiracy thriller, and then you kind of got this Euro thriller like The Shooter, or Hidden Assassin as it's known in the US. Men of War is a little bit more deep thinking than most action films of that kind of ilk. So yeah, he was kind of willing to experiment slightly as well, which sometimes it can be a little bit dangerous, and maybe that's also why he wasn't getting that kind of second chance at really being pushed as a theatrical star.
Yeah, because that's another piece of it, right? That we always think about, that, like, what role somebody takes, right? That can be as
Yeah,
big of a and yeah, and in a case like his, because of course, for him, he wasn't even someone who's brought up in the film industry. I mean, he comes to America on a Fulbright scholarship to go to MIT for chemical engineering, and just works as a bouncer and meets Grace Jones, and then she gets him the part in View to a Kill, which gets him Rocky 4. And so I'm sure like he probably didn't even know in a lot of cases like I think he started to learn it. I think as he went on in the '90s and was doing more films. But yeah, I mean, you think of like a movie like Pentathlon. Um, that's just
yeah,
such a completely out there movie that you would base an action film around the Olympic sport of modern pentathlon. But like you said, he probably looked at it as like an athlete, someone who's into that kind of thing. That like, oh, this would be great to sort of sell this sport, and I can be someone who's helping with that. And like you said, it's a unique kind of movie because it is, an action film based on an Olympics, a kind of more obscure Olympic sport. But on the other hand, it's like the kind of movie, especially coming after the Joshua Tree, that didn't make into the theater like he was hoping to. It's the kind of movie that, like, yeah, I don't, distributors probably didn't even know what to do with it. They just sort of, tried to sell it as a straight ahead actioner, but then when you watch it, you're just like, I yeah, I mean, it's like a really fun movie. I really enjoy it, but it is also it's not something that's going to resonate with everybody, because they're not going to know what to do with a sport like modern pentathlon.
yeah. That's it, really. I mean, it's one of those things that you can put his name on a poster and it's a surefire hit on HBO and video. So you've kind of got that to fall back on. But I think some of them were quite difficult. Really, I guess certainly in the US to kind of find an audience for. Um, there's parts of Europe where they kind of stuck with Dolph a little bit longer, and appreciated things certainly like Men of War. Um, yeah, but I think also maybe he kind of, instead of sticking to one thing and perhaps finding his niche, it was that kind of thing of wanting to kind of do things that were a little bit different, um, which I think ultimately has left him with a CV that's quite interesting. It, in terms of like the variations, certainly for that early '90s period. But I think if you look at, Seagal was, kind of doing a repeat of the same things for his first four movies until he did Under Siege. Um, Van Damme had a very distinct kind of formula as well. But Dolph never really kind of found his, I guess, a calling card. Probably the closest was kind of being the villain, because his most successful films he tended to be like the antagonist, really.
Right, which unfortunately, as you said, that also can hurt an ability
Yeah,
to build a career because yeah, he's known as the the antagonist in Rocky 4, and then he's known as the antagonist in Universal Soldier, uh, and so those two movies probably the one movie that the movies that he's the hero in are the ones that don't do as well, unfortunately. For and not maybe not because of him, but just because of the reality of like for example, Masters of the Universe just was a movie that was sautéed in wrong sauce, and that just and of course it came out in '87 when most of the kids like myself who collected He-Man figures, we were kind of done with He-Man at
yeah,
that point. So and that's also I think the thing with a lot of these Marvel movies that were coming out around this time is that too, like they would sit on a shelf for a long time, or like the Punisher in '89, I think it they were hoping when it came out that they could maybe even sort of cash in on the success of Batman. But it went through whatever wranglings it went through that it didn't get a theatrical release. But for Dolph, I think he was thinking that would be like the kind of movie that would push him through. But when you think about the Punisher as like a kind of a Marvel hero, he's not quite the kind of Marvel hero that is sort of packaged to make someone a big star. It's not like Spider-Man or Superman or somebody like that. He's kind of a little bit more on the margins there. I mean, he's an R-rated star in that sense, and other attempts to make the Punisher haven't always been that successful either. So it's not like it's just him, um, but it's not the kind of movie that would make somebody into like the next big household name.
no, it was a difficult era for that kind of film. Um, something is like Batman is kind of like all encompassing, and kind of everyone knows the character, everyone kind of has an idea of what the character should be like. And obviously, Tim Burton flipped it around enough to do something interesting with what everyone was kind of, you know, it's their established idea of Batman was. Um, yeah, but I think in terms of Joshua Tree, it was, in terms of what he was doing around about that time, it was probably the most kind of simplified, kind of simple idea. When he'd obviously tried things like Cover Up and Pentathlon, a little bit later Men of War, then Silent Trigger. This was kind of like what should have been a straightforward kind of Dolph-led action vehicle.
Yeah, because it really, like you said, it's
yeah. So in theory, this was their attempt to do
sorry about that. No, I guess there was a delay there. Sorry about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was their attempt really to kind of do a really kind of simplistic kind of action film. Just, simple kind of hero redemption story, and kind of load everything up with a load of action.
Yeah, and it is when you think about it, like when you go through his, I mean, Shout Out a Little Tokyo, I think could have been that movie, but even that one has some odd, interesting touches to it, which I think excuse me, I think makes the movie more interesting. But there are also some very, very, I mean, there's definitely some lines in that movie and some things like that make it a little bit, like Joshua Tree is definitely a more straight ahead one that you could just kind of have anybody watch and they would get it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and obviously, Showdown as well. He's kind of sharing the weight with Brandon Lee.
Yeah, and there are some jokes in Showdown and Little Tokyo that I think, I mean, it's the kind of movie where like you watch it with friends and they get a kick out of it, when he's like, sees Dolph and he's like, "Oh, you've got the biggest dick I've ever seen on a man," and it's like, it's the kind of line you're not going to see in Joshua Tree, and it's always, my friends and I always get a kick out of that line because we're like, what, so you're just checking out other animals endowed, like how endowed other animals are. You're just like, from the human standpoint, he's the biggest, but compared to some of the other animals I've seen, so it's just like those kinds of lines that you're not going to see that kind of thing in Joshua Tree.
No, definitely not. And I think, Joshua Tree also, they kind of identified what was kind of popular at the time, and that was everyone was starting to get into that phase of, I guess, copying John Woo.
Yeah, and he even said that the director of the film, Vic Armstrong, even says that he stole from John Woo, which John Woo was like, well, I stole from you too, so don't worry about it. Which but yeah, I can't remember where they met. But yeah, he said he was like he was a little embarrassed. I think there was a screening that John Woo was at of this film, and he was like a little embarrassed. In particular of the scene at the illegal chop shop that's like a huge shootout, because he had borrowed a lot from John Woo for that scene. And I think Woo was there for a screening or something like that. He was embarrassed because he thought, oh, he's watch this and be like, oh, this guy's ripping me off. But actually, Woo was fine with it.
Yeah, I mean, by that point, he was probably getting quite used to it. Obviously, I think this came out the same year as Hard Target as well. So, John Woo's kind of coming into Hollywood now, and kind of, really bringing his that style with him and kind of becoming really popular. So, I mean, I guess in terms of like a lot of the, I wouldn't like to say rip-offs, but, the ones that kind of followed in his style, Joshua Tree was one of the kind of the earliest efforts.
Yeah, and that's a good point because Hard Target came out in '93 as well, and so and of course in America, Hard Target would have been out before Joshua Tree, because I guess no, I guess it would have been around the same time, because it would have been HBO in early '93 or '94. So for American audiences, they would have probably seen Hard Target first and then come across Joshua Tree after that.
Yeah. So I think it's one of those interesting films at the start of a kind of stylistic period in action. And then you've kind of got, Vic Armstrong, obviously coming from his stunt background, brings a lot of his kind of staples and specialities to the film as well. So you've got, it's packed with, 3 or 4 car chases as well.
Yeah, which is a lot of fun as well, like between the car chases and the explosions and the shootings and stuff like that. Yeah, so yeah, why don't we do this? We'll take a break here, and then we'll come back and we'll kind of get stuck in here on the Joshua Tree.
It's the early 90s in LA. The war on drugs is raging, and Detective John Bainbridge is the LAPD's secret weapon against crime. Former Special Forces in Nam, he's a cop on the edge. When he and his partner Geary uncover a potential human trafficking ring, it doesn't take long before John Bainbridge realizes this thing goes all the way to the top, which doesn't scare him. That just means they'll fall that much harder when he takes them down. Part send-up and part love letter to early 90s action films, Bainbridge will take you back to the golden days of Canon, PM Entertainment, and AIP. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited from Amazon. Follow the link in the podcast description. My newest novel, Don's House in the Mountains, is available now. It follows Don Veazey, who after 20 years has finally made it as a writer, going from an AP English teacher to richer and more famous than he ever could have imagined. In the process, his wife Lois, feeling alienated and resentful of her husband's success, has filed for divorce, forcing Don to move to a house in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. With time alone to reflect, he's able to see how his new wealth and fame has affected his life in ways he never expected. Maybe the biggest of these is his new house, which is bigger and nicer than anything he's ever had in his entire life, but the longer he lives there, the more he gets the sense that it might have magical powers. But that can't be right. A house can't have magical powers, can it? Pick up Don's House in the Mountains today. You can find it at Amazon in paperback and in Kindle.
All right, we are back, and yeah, so we're gonna get stuck in here on the Joshua Tree. So I'll give a quick synopsis here. Try to make it as easy as possible because I think it there are a lot of moving parts here with this film, but essentially Dolph plays a character named Wellman Santee, who's a truck driver. He drives contraband for somebody, we're not sure who, but initially he drives with Ken Foree, who I believe was Dawn of the Dead he was in, I think, right? Or was it Day of the Dead? It was the
Dawn of the Dead, yeah.
Yeah, so I always remember it as the woman in the mall. That's how I always think of it. But they're driving and they get stopped by a cop. Ken Foree goes out to talk to that police officer. There's a shootout. The cop and Ken Foree both end up dead. Dolph's character Wellman Santee is shot, and he's kind of takes the rap for these murders. So while he's recovering in protective custody, after that, he is being transported to a prison where the guards transporting him try to kill him. He takes them out. And now he's on the run. So as he's on the run, Kristen Alfonso, a popular soap actress here in the U.S., she's just broken up with her boyfriend Matt Battaglia, who people might know from the Universal Soldier sequels. She's pumping gas after breaking up with him, and Dolph takes her hostage, and he's kind of on the run, and his goal in the situation is to sort of maybe not so much clear his name, but get the money from these bad actors that have set him up to kill him. And so among the bad actors, we've got George Segal, who people know here in the U.S. probably from the show Just Shoot Me. He's a crooked cop who is trying to track Dolph down, and we find out that Dolph had been working for him. Jeffrey Lewis from Double Impact. He is the local sheriff who's helping track Dolph, but starts to kind of see maybe some cracks in George Segal's story. And then Michelle Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas. She's Segal's wife. And so as the story goes on, and Christian Alfonso, who is she's a local sheriff herself, she starts to kind of hear Dolph's story and starts to see some of the cracks that are coming in sort of the narrative around him, and starts to become sympathetic. And so she kind of wants to help him as he's sort of trying to, take these bad guys down, get his money, and maybe in the process clear his name. And yeah, the whole thing kind of ends in a big shootout as Dolph is hopefully able to clear his name and kind of live happily ever after. So I think that covers most of it, if I remember right.
No, I think you've done a good job there of covering it all.
Yes. Now, one thing I will say, so I I believe I own this on DVD. I kind of have my Dolph movies packed away. So I went to watch it on YouTube. And one thing I will say for people, if you watch it on YouTube, it's edited. So for example, the scene when he is almost killed by the guards and he takes them out, that scene is cut. And then there's a scene where Dolph is in a town and there's police officers and then ends up in a shootout. And that scene, part of that scene is cut where it's like almost like he and Christian Alfonso are there, and suddenly something happens. We don't know what it is, and then the next thing you know, he's shooting at some police officers while he's holding her hostage. So that's something to keep in mind. Because I know in your case, right, you've got the new Blu-ray of it.
Yeah, I've got it's a French Blu-ray. So yeah, my good friend Jeremy Dambasu gifted me that over Christmas. So I'm hoping what normally happens is you get some really nice editions kind of come out in Europe, and then because someone's obviously taken the time and effort to give a nice a nice touch up and restoration. Hopefully, some company in the US or somewhere kind of that's English language will give it a good edition for the US.
Yeah, and it does have a Blu-ray here in the U.S. It's interesting.
Yeah,
It's like a Blu-ray DVD combo pack. So I guess it means you get the Blu-ray version and the standard DVD version in one box.
yeah. I'm not in. It's one of these things where a lot of the DVD and Blu-ray editions for Dolphin, like the US and the UK, it's a bit of a mishmash sometimes with some of his older films where sometimes it's not full widescreen, or sometimes the picture quality is not great. But I think hopefully there'll be some kind of collector's edition come out at some point, because yeah, the edition I've got looks really great and it's in full kind of anamorphic widescreen.
Yeah, and I think that's a recent thing that this movie's original aspect ratio is finally being released, because for the longest time you couldn't get that, which I think the version that I got on YouTube was widescreen, but it's like one of those ones like if you tilt your phone or if you sort of do the full screen on your computer, it will it's kind of inside of a box. It's kind of the widescreen edition is sort of there's black all around it. So I
Yeah,
think that might have been an attempt to sort of take what was that version and sort of fit it into a widescreen a widescreen aspect ratio.
yeah, probably. I mean, you don't always get the best versions on YouTube, unfortunately, but um, yeah, I mean, even if they kind of put it out on streaming as it's kind of intended, that would be quite useful as well. And I think it's one of those films that's got enough of a cult following that should be, there'll be some company out there like Vinegar Syndrome or someone like that who would consider it.
Yeah, because I think one of the things with Vinegar Syndrome is that they need to have a good like film print to be able to port it to these higher quality physical media sources. And this movie would have that because I think it was intended for the big screen, so it's going to have a high quality version out there that they can use to make their copies.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're kind of some collectors might go, if especially if you've got a multi-region player, they might be tempted to go off and get maybe an edition from somewhere like the French version, which I've got. So you can watch it in English in widescreen with a nice transfer.
Yeah, and I think this is a movie that's worth it. I mean, I have a letterbox list where I rank the Dolph movies, and I I have this one as my 10th favorite Dolph film. And to be
Yeah,
honest, watching it again, I almost because the movie that I have above it is the second of the two Universal Soldier sequels that he did. So I think that one was Day of Reckoning, I believe.
yeah,
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 because the other one was Regeneration. So yeah, Day of Reckoning. So I had Day of Reckoning at 9, and I still I don't know. It's hard because like I just like the kind of the interplay in that one between Dolph's performance and Van Damme and Scott Adkins. And there was a lot going on there with the action as well as that one. But watching this one again, there is a part of me that thinks like maybe I could put this one at 9. Like I could put this one above Universal Soldier Day of Reckoning because it is such a nice, solid, straight ahead actioner.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a real nice sense of scale from it as well. I think that's also one of the benefits of, being able to see it in widescreen as well, with all these kind of vast, open, kind of desert landscapes. Um, the film looks really nice.
Yeah, exactly. And they play with the space quite because I mean, it's almost like the movie sort of moves between. It's like sort of for the most part takes place in this sort of this area outside of LA that's kind of maybe on the way to Vegas, to Las Vegas, which is sort of a popular highway area. Um, but it's still remote enough. But then there's sort of like a connection to LA. It feels like, but like you said, it really plays with that sort of the openness of the space where you get these really nice chase scenes. A lot of like Ferraris driving on dirt, which
Yeah.
just kind of it's not something that like most people when they have a Ferrari they wouldn't be driving it on roads like that. So kind of to see it look like that was really nice and almost too also as a kid growing up with Micro Machines to see the Ferrari racing the Lamborghini was a really nice touch as well.
Yeah, I mean it's got some really standout set pieces which I think really benefit the film. Um, and obviously because Vic Armstrong is so synonymous with his stunt work and his stunt coordination, he brings all that knowledge to the film. So, you often used to get a lot of directors that weren't maybe clued up on how to kind of shoot action. So they would either just leave it to the stunt guys or they would kind of attempt it themselves and not quite get it right. But obviously Vic, he kind of knows what he's doing.
Yeah, and he doesn't have many actual director credits. He only got 6, and I think a few of those were TV credits. One of the more interesting ones he has is in 2014. He did the Nicolas Cage Left Behind remake.
Yeah.
So that's I've never seen that one. So but now I'm kind of interested now knowing that he directed it, and of course Nicolas Cage. I'm always interested in his performances as well.
Yeah, I've not seen that one myself, but I think that might have been the first kind of main feature he did after this, so there was a big gap. Um, yeah, I think it's one of those things, this is like a really kind of really solid action film. So, you got a nice dispersion of set pieces throughout. And then obviously when you're coming to like the final third, it goes to this really kind of insane chop shop shootout sequence, and then that kind of leads into the final kind of car chase, and then final showdown.
Yeah, it's kind of I was trying to think of movies that compare to it, and of course, at that period in the early '90s, I mean, you had like PM, where Spiro Rosatos. It's interesting thinking about like Vic Armstrong versus like a Spiro Rosatos because Vic Armstrong was kind of more established, whereas Spiro Rosatos is still sort of making his name in those early '90s, like PM Entertainment or like the Maniac Cop films. Whereas yeah, Vic Armstrong was more established in that role, and you look at the films. I mean, Rambo 3, Indiana Jones Last Crusade, some of those ones, some bigger name kind of movies. But of course, he worked with Dolph in Cover Up in 91, and then Universal Soldier, obviously, in 92. So he kind of knew Dolph and kind of knew as well what he could do. But it's some of the scenes I remember reading in like the trivia, for example, like there's in that chop shop shootout, Dolph sets one of the guys on fire with a paint gun, and apparently he was so shocked by seeing the guy on fire that it actually delayed the scene a little bit and the guy got burned a little bit because those scenes are supposed to be so quick, right? Like when we watch, they're usually in slow
Yeah.
motion. And yeah, it was because he kind of didn't respond the way he was supposed to and move the scene along. It caused an issue, which is it's part of one of those things with these huge stunts, is that there's always that sense of danger in them, because they kind of big names like Vic Armstrong, they're always going to push the envelope a little bit.
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, this is one of those films which is it's just absolutely loaded with pyrotechnics and kind of on-screen practical effects. So I think it is one of those ones which has kind of grown in popularity throughout the years. Because I think a lot of younger fans kind of look back on some of these these older action films, and they're suddenly a little bit kind of taken aback and blown away um, by what's happening, because obviously the physical nature of seeing things blow up on screen or squibs kind of exploding everywhere, it's, it's there in camera, and it kind of hits differently than it would do with CGI.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like you watch a movie like, for example, Daniel Zarrilli's a director and producer. Of course, you've worked with him
Yeah,
on Renegade. So and I see a lot of his films, and it's like he, for example, like if he had a Ferrari in one of his movies, right, to be able to use a Ferrari, he would not have the ability to drive that Ferrari at a dirt road and involve it in chase scenes and things like that, because the budget just wouldn't be there for that.
yeah,
And I think there's a was it Phoenix? I think there is I think Randy Couture's character drives this really fancy car in it, and it's really exotic car. And I remember, I think Ty from Columbus, we were watching that one and discussing on the podcast, and he was like, "Yeah, the car's just there. Like they don't do anything with it." It's like, well, yeah, because I don't think he had the money to do anything with it. It's like you got to do that. But for movies like this at this time, budgets were a little bit better, and you could, I mean, yes, a lot of times I think in this case, I think these were like American cars that they kind of made look like their
yeah,
counterparts in some cases. So it's not like they were just going to like the local Ferrari dealership and buying up 5 or 6 Ferraris and crashing them. But even having the budget to make your own cars, and be able to use them for this purpose, you wouldn't see that. And then, like you said, like the explosions, um, in some cases with a low budget movie, it's probably better that they use CGI than the real explosions, because again, for the you watch some of those old AIP movies where like William Zip has something explode, or Ted Pryor has something exploding next to him, and you're wondering like, is he going to be okay? Um, but with a Vic Armstrong, or Spirit Rosatos or somebody like that making the movie, that it's going to be safer there. And so to actually see the practical effects like that, it adds a level. And in this case, for sure, it definitely added a level that you don't generally see in movies today where the budgets aren't quite there.
yeah, definitely. I think money doesn't kind of stretch like it used to either. So something like this wasn't kind of, I guess, considered big budget at the time, but just in terms of the spectacle and what you get on screen, there's a sense of scale to it compared to not even just a lot of direct-to-video action films these days. I just think sometimes you can watch a $200 million movie and they kind of look a little bit cheap because maybe the CGI isn't quite as good as it should be or could be. Um, and it just got this sense of, if you see something that's been shot in a studio, it doesn't maybe have the sense of scale that, if you're watching a John Woo film, or you watch the end of Hard Target in the warehouse with all the kind of like the fairground attraction rides that they've got in there, and all the stuff for like the I think it's for the festival stuff that was in the end of Hard Target, and obviously the chop shop in Joshua Tree. There's just a sense of scale and carnage. So you've got all this stuff happening and blowing up, and kind of like squibs everywhere, um, cars getting wrecked. There's a real sense of scale and kind of real sense of scale to that. So they, even compared to sort of big budget films now, they kind of look quite big. Certainly of the this era and that scale of film.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think, like you said, like this movie, I think, and on IMDb, it said the budget was $9 million, which I don't know if it's fully like a double for inflation. Like I don't know if you'd say it's 18 or 20 million that it would cost now, but getting 9 million in today's dollars, right, to make a movie that is going to be direct to TV or direct to streaming would be almost, it would be difficult to find that kind of money. So even you
Yeah,
know even adjusting for inflation, and this would be an expensive movie today, but with the budgets there to kind of make that kind of thing, and then like you said, someone like a Vic Armstrong, sort of like you know going out in the desert and just sort of having all of these really great scenes, and again being inspired by John Woo, which I think is another piece of it where it's like, excuse me, sorry, um, it's another piece of it where it's like I don't want to say like guys like Vic Armstrong were looking to see what everybody else was doing in the industry and being inspired by it. And I think that's always a really cool thing that, like, he made it sound like he was ripping off John Woo, but I think he was inspired by John Woo to really put together some really fantastic scenes that, um, yeah, make this one kind of a real must for Dolph fans if they haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is one of his better ones. Um, I don't think it's necessarily in terms of like characterization, it's quite as interesting as some of the other films that he did of that era. But I think just in terms of being a pure action film, it kind of ticks so many boxes. Um, Dolph kind of gets to do his thing. You got a couple of shootouts in there, and you got some great. Obviously, the car chases in it are all really well put together. I think it's a good, as well as being kind of like a nice John Woo homage as well. It kind of throws back to kind of Sam Peckinpah films as well. And obviously, Woo was kind of heavily influenced by Peckinpah, but it's got shades of things like The Getaway, films like that.
Yeah, this definitely kind of had that edge to it that you get from Peckinpah, which I really liked. And then of
Yeah,
course, like throughout the film, he's watching Bogart films like High Sierra. So there's also kind of a throwback to that. And it's funny because some people had mentioned that this is more of a film noir than an action film, and I think it's more. I don't know that it's more film noir than action. I think it's like a movie that's sort of trying to borrow from multiple uh, places that I think Vic Armstrong
yeah,
had, and I think that again, like you talked about with Dolph, where he might have been intrigued by that idea that he could, um, that there's a noirish aspect to the film. At the same time, it's a straight ahead actioner that has these really great sequences in it, and I don't, I think the one thing I think is good about this movie is that even if it is influenced by film noir, it never lets anything get in the way of the action. The action's kind of the number one piece, and I think that always helps a movie like this. That it's it's going to be kind of building up to these really great big action set pieces, and it's not going to give you like these long periods of time where nothing's really happening, which I think is important.
yeah, definitely. I think coming off the back of something like Universal Soldier as well, that was kind of very action packed. Um, and I suppose for the time that had quite a moderate budget as well, Universal Soldier. So there's a lot of scale and spectacle to that. So as being kind of his follow up to that, it's kind of got to hit par with it really in terms of scale and spectacle. Because again, ultimately, when you're watching kind of your favorite action star, I guess you kind of have to you want the boxes to be ticked and you want them to deliver to your expectations. So certainly they have a certain level that they try to hit with the action and the scale. And yeah, I think Vic Armstrong really hits that here.
Yeah, for sure. Which I think is a kind of a it is like it for Dolph's movies again, especially if you're comparing. I mean, I was trying to compare this to some of his newer things, and it's like take a movie like A Castle Falls, that he does with Scott Adkins that that he directed, and that has some nice scenes. It has some nice fight scenes, some nice action moments in it. But it doesn't really compare to something like this in that sense that like this has so much more going on in it that Castle Falls is just like a nice movie and it's in its own right, but he's not really doing this kind of thing in direct to video anymore. Like this kind of movie, you're not really going to see that from Dolph when you see like his newest movies coming out.
No, I think it's almost becoming a point where it's a little bit of an impossibility, really. I know you've got certain things like I guess there's kind of safety issues, so there's a natural leaning now towards using CGI over maybe doing the stunt, um, and money just doesn't stretch as far as it used to. Whereas maybe back in the day, wrecking a car might have cost been relatively cheap. Maybe nowadays it just costs a lot more. You might need 2 or 3 extra layers of paperwork and insurance to kind of add to it compared to maybe 30 years ago. Um, yeah, so it's difficult because it's come from a kind of bygone age, I guess, of like a this is right at the kind of middle of the peak of direct to video action, and it's one of the kind of higher points I think of that kind of that wheelhouse. So films like this, and then things like PM, where they're packing in so much spectacle and scale and kind of really great stunts. Yeah, it's one of those things you don't really see anymore. But I don't know, whether they can actually do it anymore, just in terms of the budgets you get. Because I think like we were saying a bit earlier, where you could go to somewhere like Cannes with a Seagal on a poster, and then you've made your money before you've even made the film. It doesn't necessarily work that way anymore. So yeah, people are working with smaller budgets. Uh, it's harder to kind of get really kind of big stunts and do elaborate things and really do what you want in front of camera. If you're someone like Christopher Nolan, you can do it, but you almost need, what someone might have done with $20 million back in the day, you almost need sort of $150 million to do that now. And to be someone like Christopher Nolan or Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. I mean, you think of like the most recent Fast and Furious movie, where it's I think that budget was over 300 million, and yes, I mean it goes over the top with these huge stunts, but also there. I know that the director of that film wanted more practical stunts. His I think the words he used was, "I wanted to bring the film franchise back down to earth," because obviously Fast and Furious 9 they go into outer space, and so he wanted to bring it down to earth.
Yeah.
But it's the kind of thing where I saw that one in the theater, and so I kind of was like experiencing it in the theater, and it was kind of larger than life in that sense, to be seeing this bomb like rolling down Rome and destroying it and things like that. But like you said, like a movie like this has a kind of a different feel to it. Like you said, it hits differently because it it doesn't have that sort of washed out digital look that so many movies have nowadays,
Yeah.
which I get. Like, I mean, for a movie like this to shoot in the desert, I'm sure there's a uh, there's some limitations to making sure that I mean, I guess in the desert you're probably getting the same sun almost every day, so maybe lighting isn't as much of an issue as it would be. But yeah, that this movie, like you said, it feels more authentic in that sense. And so even if it was only a fraction of the budget of like a Fast and Furious, there's something about it that from the brain and seeing it as a more practical thing, it like you said, it just yeah, it just hits differently. It just feels different when you're watching something from this period and you're seeing it as something that feels like more like real than like a Fast and Furious movie.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the benefits as well of kind of having this kind of largely desert setting as well. There's something kind of there's a feeling of texture to the film when you're watching it. You can almost feel like you're out there in the kind of dry heat and the dust. And obviously, when there's car chases kind of ripping through these desert terrains, you've got sand and everything and dust flying everywhere. So yeah, there's a real kind of sense of texture there that I don't think you necessarily get with a lot of films these days. I mean, like you say, even on digital, you might have something in the same kind of setting, but it might be cleansed out, or it might just look too kind of clean. Um, there's a real sense of kind of dust and dirt in this. Um, yeah, I think one of the other things I really like in this film was the music as well.
Yeah, I thought the music was great. I mean, the only thing about the music that I thought was intriguing is the very end of the movie. And I don't know if the version that you have has this, where the music that plays at the very end is almost like this almost like kind of suspense kind of music that makes me think like there's something ominous happening when it's more of a happy ending. But beyond that, I totally agree. I thought the music was really great in this.
Yeah, yeah, from Joel Goldsmith, Jerry Goldsmith's brother. So he'd done predominantly kind of a lot of TV work, but I think he does a really good job here, doing something that's almost it's quite distinct as well. The kind of style he goes for here. Yeah, I've always found it quite enjoyable. It's one of those ones where I wish it kind of had a soundtrack release, but unfortunately not.
Yeah, it's always interesting how some of these obscure movies do get soundtrack releases that are available somewhere. But
Yeah,
I wonder if because this was a direct to HBO movie, because a lot of times in America, that soundtrack is like a way to help sell the film, and or another way for them to monetize the film. And you think of like like Purple Rain or Saturday Night Fever, where the album was something that was sold on top of the the ticket sales. And I wonder if with a direct to video or direct to cable kind of thing, that's not as imperative. So the soundtrack gets lost.
yeah. Occasionally, yeah, it used to be the case that they'd get a little bit lost. I mean, you've had some that have kind of been retrospectively released, like Dennis Drath kind of has released his Punisher soundtrack from the Dolph Punisher. Um, yeah, but this was one of those ones that I'd always kind of wished would kind of pop up on YouTube. Obviously, from the digital age, kind of in the last 20 years, it's a lot easier. So, um, composers can even just release the thing themselves, as long as they've kind of retained the ownership to it.
Yeah, that's a good point. 'Cause I know that's something Albert Pyun did with Tony Ripperetti would do the scores for his movies, and
Yeah,
he started getting a hold of those and releasing those. Or sometimes, right, the Tony Ripperetti score would be removed in the final cut of his movie, and he was able to get like these director's cuts that he was releasing where he could re-release it with the Tony Ripper. I think one of those was, I think Cyborg was one of those where his score was removed and he re-released it with the score intact. So yeah, you're right. Some of the directors out there are kind of also getting a hold of those scores and reusing them.
yeah. But I think that's another thing sometimes where aspects like the cinematography and then the score and everything like that, they've there's been a good amount of money kind of pushed onto those as well. um, Whereas there's certain technical aspects that especially if you've got very little money and you've got a very short shooting schedule, you're kind of having to scrimp everywhere, and then you get into post and you have to scrimp again. um, but there's a sense here in that kind of age of action where they were getting good composers in to do interesting scores, and they were kind of given a bit of freedom to do that. um, and they had good cinematographers. um, yeah, so all the technical aspects in this film are really impressive as well.
Yeah, because that's a common thing I think with modern DTVs. That sometimes it's like the filmmakers might get some sort of local bands that are trying to push through, and they'll give them some songs, and the filmmakers will just kind of sprinkle those songs throughout. Or in terms of like you said like it might be not somebody who's necessarily known for scoring films, but like is someone who creates music maybe like in a more traditional sense, and they provide the music, or in some cases they might just be getting stock music from somewhere and using that in the
Yeah,
film, and yeah, having someone to actually score the film, it's like you said, it's a piece of a budget that is one of those things that most modern DTV, it's something that gets cut from the budget that it can really enhance the film.
yeah. I mean, it's that sometimes it will just be a case of they'll give they'll give it to a composer, give them a short window, and they put something that gets kind of put on the film, which maybe not necessarily fits the scene or fits the film. Um, yeah, so you kind of get something that almost becomes like noise in the background rather than building an atmosphere or kind of making you feel something. But I don't know. I've always felt like the old kind of action scores of the 80s and 90s it was like a really great era for kind of action music. And you don't necessarily get that quite as much now. um, because yeah, it's just difficult where you don't have the time or the money to kind of do something that's kind of interesting, or everyone's kind of trying to copy a certain archetype. um, it might be someone's trying to do a Hans Zimmer but on a budget. um, yeah, so it can be difficult, but I think yeah, from all the technical standpoints on Joshua Tree, I think they're impressive. The only kind of thing I think is a little bit off really is occasionally some of the editing is a little bit, that's where it kind of falls short in some moments, is some of the editing's a little bit sloppy sometimes.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And it especially sometimes as you get towards the end as well, where things are really coming together and you're really starting to kind of get a everything's kind of really moving. That yeah, sometimes that editing, like you said, it can be a little distracting when it's not as clean as it should be.
Yeah, I think, certainly in something like the chop shop sequence, I know there's been a couple of different versions of that sequence itself. I mean, there's a director's cut version. There's been kind of versions released over the years of different cuts in terms of the level of violence as well. But yeah, sometimes the sort of the continuity goes a little bit off because you'll see certain moments repeated or shown again from slightly different angle. I think Al Leon, the legendary stuntman himself, he probably gets killed about 3 or 4 times in the film. Um, yeah, so yeah, there's a few kind of odd editorial choices. I'm not sure how much of a kind of a say Vic Armstrong had in the edit. I think sometimes when you've got so much kind of, they must have shot masses of footage and so many kind of different camera angles and all this carnage happening, that obviously it must have been a nightmare for piecing together in continuity. But yeah, but I mean, for the most part, I think the film looks great, and yeah, the action really kind of has a lot of impact in it.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point because I think, excuse me, that scene in the chop shop is so ambitious, and
Yeah,
they try to do so much with it that, um, in a way, it's almost like, um, in a way, it's like the fact that that it was there were some editing issues there, but not as many. It's almost like a credit to how much they were going for with that scene, that they were able to edit it as well as they could in some of those circumstances.
yeah, definitely, for sure. I mean, someone like John Woo, particularly when he had kind of final cut and he had control of everything. Uh, back in Hong Kong, certainly when he used to work with a particular editor called David Wu, there's a kind of synergy there. So, Wu would know kind of instinctively what he was shooting and how it would come together. And then his editor would kind of know as well. So everything would come out kind of, near perfect, really. So, you might not necessarily have that synergy here between the director and the editor. But yeah, I mean, there's, it's nothing kind of major. It's just really a minor nitpick, really. But it's that one technical aspect where it isn't quite nailed as well as it could have been. Um, but I think, yeah, one of the other things I really kind of liked about this film is it's kind of got a very distinct uh, outfit for Dolph as well. It's almost like like a calling card outfit in this one with the jeans and the red t-shirt.
Yeah, and it's almost as if, even though this movie was meant to be, I mean, I guess, thinking about like, being in the theater, this would have been a big poster that when you walk into the theater, you would have seen it. And it's almost like they were making them, they designed his outfit with that in mind. And it's of course what you
Yeah,
see on the kind of the most common cover. I mean, all the covers have him in that outfit. But I mean, I think the most common one is that sort of that desert background with the red, with the shotgun over his shoulder. I think that was the idea that he was going for, which it is kind of amazing to think, because nowadays, right, you're thinking of the thumbnail and like what you want the streaming
yeah.
thumbnail to look like. But at that time, it would have been the poster, and it's almost iconic, when you think of the Dolph's outfits in bigger characters. That's kind of one of the bigger ones.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I don't think you can underestimate something like that as well in terms of like an action film. Um, Obviously, this is something that's become so kind of distinct with even the comic book genre in general, because, everyone has a pre-established idea of how Batman should look or Superman. And then obviously if you do variations of that when you adapt it to the big screen, you still have to have this kind of very kind of clear, distinct image. So, it is a very important thing to kind of that maybe gets often overlooked in the genre now as well.
Yeah, because you look at like one of the things obviously like with the comic book movies is like with Marvel, for example, um, every sequel, the main characters, need to have a new uniform. They have to like tweak the uniform because it's almost kind of like
Yeah,
whether it's sports, whether in the UK or in America, where every year the team has new uniforms or new kits. So that you can sell those to the fans, right? They can go out and buy those new ones. It's a similar thing with like action figures, right? Kids aren't going to buy the same Captain America uh, figure if the for the new movie if he has the same outfit as the previous movie. But it is even though this movie wasn't going to be selling Dolph action figures. It still is kind of important, like you said, to think about like what the character's wearing, what the outfit is, and again, I think with these movies having modern movies with the digital film having kind of that more washed out look where colors don't always pop like they used to back then. It's almost like a lost art, I think, when it comes to these movies.
yeah. I mean, this is one of those films where I can kind of I'll think to it and I get that very clear image of Dolph's um, main outfit in the film. It's like thinking of Van Damme in Hard Target, and you immediately think of double denim and the mullet. Um, John McClane in his vest, things like that. So, you know, they really kind of get the imaging right in this, and then obviously you've got the whole, the added flourishes. So, Dolph's in a Ferrari as well. That's always quite a good thing to have as well. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of like merchandising, had it been a big success or a big theatrical movie, it certainly had everything in place to kind of have the accompanying merchandise as well. You could have had a Wellman Santee figure. You could have had an additional car that you could have bought for him as well. So yeah, I think all those kind of aspects really come together quite well to get create this overall kind of package of a really well put together action film.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree there. And one of the other aspects of the film that I wanted to touch on too is Christian Alfonso as sort of like the leading lady in the film. Now, one of the interesting notes about this movie is that out of all the Dolph films that I've reviewed on the site, this one used to have like the most views. It's actually third most now. It's behind Rocky IV, which is rare that a big screen movie that I review has a lot of views because usually it's so like down the list in the ecosystem of critic reviews that nobody ever usually finds my review for it. So the fact that Rocky IV is a big one is a kind of a big deal. But then also Legendary. That was like kind of the last review I did before I went on unplanned hiatus for like 4 years. And so whenever people were coming back to the site to see if I'd post it again, they would see the Legendary review. So that one's got a lot of views. But the Joshua Tree actually had so many reviews because I had talked about Kristen Alfonso being nude in the film. And excuse me, anybody who typed in Christian Alfonso nude found my review, which of course it's not
Yeah,
actually her who's nude, it's a body double. But I was like so kind of shocked because she's a popular soap actress here in the U.S. and I was like, oh, that's interesting that she would get nude in this or be topless in this movie, but it's not her. But yeah, it's kind of one of those SEO things that Christian Alfonso nude, people typing that in, they find the review, and yeah, it became my most popular Dolph review for a little bit of time there.
yeah. I think and she's really good in the film as well. I think yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where that kind of genre, it's difficult to be the kind of the female lead, I guess. You don't always get the most kind of character development or you almost get kind of resigned to playing either like the damsel in distress or like a femme fatale. But I think, she's quite a strong character, one of the more interesting um, kind of female leads in Dolph's CV, really.
Yeah, and I think she's another situation where she was doing soap operas. She was really big in the soap world, and I think she thought this would maybe be her move to the big screen. And of course, when this film doesn't get released theatrically, of course, that's kind of it. Like, she didn't make that move. But yeah, I thought she was an interesting, like you said, because she's a stronger lead, female lead, even though she's being held hostage by Dolph. There's some interesting interplay with her and Dolph, where it's almost like she doesn't there's almost like a sense that I don't want to say she doesn't mind being held hostage, but there's almost a sense that there's almost like I don't know if it's a turn on thing or something, because there's even some times where she kind of will say to him things like, she'll ask him a question or something, and he's not sure he wants to respond. And she's like, well, if you want, or you can just hit me or something to get me to stop talking or something like that, almost like she's, suggesting he does it or something like that. It's really interesting interplay that you don't usually see. There's almost like usually when there's sort of this hostage thing, there's like more of a Stockholm syndrome kind of thing, where the woman just sort of like goes for, like, I don't know how to explain. Like, there's like the Stockholm thing where it's almost like she hates the guy, but then slowly, like, starts to like him. Whereas in this case, it's almost like, she just broke up with her boyfriend, played by Matt Battaglia, and she doesn't like the fact necessarily she's being held hostage by Dolph, but she also kind of likes him. She also is kind of attracted to him, and she plays that in a way with this nuance that you don't usually see in these kinds of movies. So that when she does start to have more agency, as her and Dolph are trusting each other more, it feels much more natural than her just suddenly flipping a switch and being like, oh, I'm going to help Dolph now.
Yeah, definitely. I think you also get that sense of her. She's obviously she's trying to hide it, but she's got a cop hat on as well. So she's really trying to figure a way to kind of at first kind of get out of the situation. Then it kind of develops into, well, there is something more to this guy than meets the eye, and more to his situation. So she starts to kind of try and delve into maybe what is the reasoning behind his actions, and who's involved.
Yeah, and I was trying to think of, like, in terms of his female leads in his movies, and there aren't a lot of big names. I mean, obviously Tia Carrere comes up, in Showdown in Little Tokyo, and then Gina Bellman in Silent Trigger, but there aren't usually a lot of names that you'd go like, oh, okay, I know her, or I guess Catherine Bell from Jag, but she's not really his leading lady in Men of War. So it's an interesting piece, because it's one of those parts of these movies where a lot of times they just kind of just grab, whoever, if it's maybe sometimes like an Eastern European actress who's maybe more of a model, but they're filming in Bulgaria, so let's just have her, or Romania or something, and have her in the
Yeah.
role. But there can be something to that. I think another one I'm thinking was In the Name of the King, Two Worlds, that has Natasha Malthe, and that leading actress role can it's a lot of times just more of a throwaway part, but it can be something that enhances a film. And I think this is an example of that, where getting an actress like Christian Alfonso, who one, she does a lot of soap opera work, so she's probably used to working on a tighter schedule, and nailing scenes more that way. But again, she's an accomplished actress, and she adds something to the role than simply just grabbing a model, or someone who's just sort of trying to break into acting and just having them be that part. And when you look at their IMDb bio, you see like 5 other roles or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's one of the elements that makes the film still stand up. And then obviously on the flip side, you've got. I've always quite liked the villain pairing in the film. They kind of play it very kind of. I wouldn't say sort of over the top, but they're kind of pushing it to that realm, really, with George Segal and Bo Starr.
Yeah, and I remember when I first reviewed this, I was kind of I had a little trouble with George Segal as a villain, because I was so used to seeing him in Just Shoot Me, and that sitcom, and I was like, I don't know if I can take him seriously. But this, watching it this time here for this, I actually uh, liked him better as a baddie in this. He definitely, there's a bit of scenery chewing that he does,
Yeah.
and he leans into it, and there's like a diabolical nature to it, but then there's also this sort of like offbeat nature to it, that when you put the two together, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, it almost feels like they're a sitcom double act that have just popped up in an action film. Um, Yeah, because I wouldn't say they're kind of menacing particularly, but yeah, it's that interplay, the bickering and stuff, and then yeah, they're kind of playing it well. Particularly George Segal is kind of like dialing it up a lot. So yeah, it's kind of like an interesting variation where you could have had a kind of a much more generic villain in it, and maybe not been quite as memorable.
Right. Well, because again, that's again, a lot of times with the DTV movies, it's like if they get a big name to play a villain, they don't get a lot of screen time. And so,
Yeah,
whereas like something like this, I mean, obviously George Segal wouldn't have been such a huge star, right? That he would be. They'd only have him for a short period of time anyway. But they again, a good baddie can enhance a film like this in a way that again. He's fun when you see him on screen, but then also you still want Dolph to eventually beat him, and that interplay is always important, I think, to kind of helping us stay engaged with wanting to see Dolph succeed.
yeah, most definitely, yeah,
Yeah, and I was trying to think who else. I mean, obviously, I mean Michelle Phillips from the Mamas and the Papas has a very small role as Seagal's wife, and she almost has it's an interesting role where Dolph comes to her because he wants her to contact this the guy who's running the chop shop so he can get the money from him, and there's that sense of like she she wants him to sort of take advantage of her there. And then when he just sort of stuffs her in a closet and says, "Okay, let's get out of here," with Christian Alfonso, now she's like almost like a scorned woman, despite the fact being
yeah,
married, And she comes out with a shotgun and starts like shooting at people, which I don't know if I would have expected, Michelle Phillips from Mamas and the Papas to that wasn't something I had on my bingo card for an action movie was Michelle Phillips shooting at Dolph with a shotgun, but it was a great touch.
yeah. It was a nice, interesting little role for her in that, and again, yeah, unexpected. Um, Yeah, and then you've got Jeffrey Lewis, who's kind of playing. He plays similar roles in a lot of his films, but you always get good value out of him.
Yeah, yeah, he was great as well. And then again with Matt Battaglia, it was an interesting kind of connection there that Dolph Lundgren had just done Universal Soldier, and then Matt Battaglia would go on to do what were direct to Showtime instead of direct to HBO, direct to Showtime sequels for Universal Soldier, where he was going to play Dolph's role in those films.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, those were quite interesting casts in those as well. I think Burt Reynolds was in one or two of them.
Yes, yeah, we had Burt Reynolds in one.
Yeah, Gary
Uh,
Busey as well. I think.
Gary Busey, yes, and then yeah, also Jeff Wincott was playing like another Universal Soldier in some of them. Yeah, yeah, really interesting movies. Yeah, and I was trying to look because Nick Chinland has a very small role in this
Yeah,
as Jeffrey Lewis's partner. And I was looking at and I thought this was kind of early in his career, and it was. Of course, now we think of Nick Chinland in like, he's just kind of like this usually like this sort of like skeezy bad guy character in either direct to video movies or bigger budget things. But he's kind of this one that like he's kind of leaned into that kind of person, that kind of that's I guess yeah, I mean almost like a cleaner Billy Drago or something. But that's sort of what he's been doing. But it's interesting seeing him here where he's younger. It's a very small part, but he's not that character. And I almost like in watching him in this, I was expecting him to like, you know, call the baddies and sell Dolph out or something like that because I'm just so used to him being that kind of character.
yeah. I was similar, really. Compared to what he's become known for. It's just interesting to see him kind of at the start, really.
Yeah, because in a way, Dolph was obviously a little bit ahead of him because he'd been doing other films, but yeah, it's kind of all of these guys seeing them being as a lot younger. Um, and yeah, Nick Chinland, it was like you almost don't recognize him if you're not knowing to look for him. It's almost like when I first saw him, I was like, I know that guy, but I'm not sure who he is. I can't, can't place it. And then I looked at it, I was like, oh, that's him. Yeah, because you're used to seeing with more hair and kind of, more wrinkles and kind of, just scowling and just being a baddie. And so, yeah, like you said, it's interesting to see him at the very beginning of his career with this really small part. And what he ends up being in movies. I mean, I think of like Chronicles of Riddick, that kind of role that he did.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to think if there's anything else on my end that I had wanted to mention about this film. I mean, obviously that quirk about the fact that it is the most popular Dolph post because of the line about Christian Alfonso being nude in the movie is probably the kind of the funnier thing. But also, I think this is one of Dolph's best. I think when I look at, it's one of my favorites of his. But yeah, Tom, I don't know if there was anything else that we hadn't covered that you wanted to mention.
No, I think we've covered it. I think I would agree as well. It's one of my favourites. I think it's simple. It kind of does what it says on the tin, and yeah, it just does it really well. And it's just that it's one of these kind of old throwbacks that you kind of look at now. Dolph's in his kind of peak period there, and yeah, really kind of action packed and quite spectacular in places as well.
Yeah, and I think for Dolph fans who haven't seen it, I think one, try to get one of the physical copies of it because the
Yeah,
YouTube version of it is edited and you're gonna miss out on scenes. So I think the actual cut of the movie is like um, I think it's like an hour and 45 minutes, something in that range. And so I know that the YouTube versions are like an hour 29, hour 32. So I think like the UK VHS was like 97 minutes. So even by that standard, the YouTube versions are shorter. So look for kind of a more robust version if you haven't seen it before, because I think, you know, this is definitely worth it. This is definitely the kind of that early 90s action that we just don't really get to the same degree anymore. And it's definitely worth checking out.
yeah, agreed. I think yeah, if you want kind of like plenty of bang for your buck, this definitely delivers.
Yeah, and yeah, as we're wrapping up, Tom, anything that you'd like to plug?
Uh, yeah, so I've got a film coming out. I think we've mentioned him a little bit earlier in the episode anyway, but Mark L. Lester. So I've made a film with him called Cinderella's Revenge, and that's probably going to be out in the second quarter of the year. Um, so the US release date should be announced maybe sometime in the next month or two. So yeah, hopefully there'll be a release date for that one soon.
Excellent. Yeah, that I think we had talked about that one of the times that you were on recently. Yeah, it's got just looking at it over here. I mean, we've got Natasha Henstridge, and then like you mentioned, Mark L. Lester, who did Showdown in Little Tokyo. Or am I looking at the right movie?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, definitely one to check out. I think thinking of leading women, Natasha Henstridge is one we haven't uh, mentioned, but she's always always great, and to see in these kinds of movies.
yep. I was
Yeah,
definitely pleased when they cast her in the film.
yeah. So is it like a almost like an action version of Cinderella?
So it's more like a sort of comedy horror, I would say. Um, yeah, so it's not. Well, I guess Mark Lester, he's kind of dipped his toe into so many different genres, even though he's probably most synonymous with stuff like Commando. But yeah, this is yeah more like a sort of comedy horror. Um, yeah, so hopefully that will come out in the US uh, in the sort of second quarter of the year.
Excellent. And will it be sort of like rent first and then free
Uh,
streamers later, or?
we're waiting for confirmation, but we're hopefully it'll be theatrical,
Oh,
um, limited, but yeah, theatrical release.
nice. If it's theatrical, if it has a limited release in New York, I'm close enough in Philadelphia. I know. I remember I asked about Renegades. I think Renegades ended up not having
Yeah, I think
Anything?
that was more kind of LA, but yeah, rather than up near in New York. But I mean, this one will hopefully it'll be in that territory as well.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I would love to see it on the big screen because yeah, that's a yeah. Like, in Philadelphia, I'm close enough to New York and Washington D.C. Though usually nothing. If something's not going to screen in New York, it's not going to screen in D.C. either. But yeah, but New York is close enough that like if a theater is doing a premiere like that, I can get up there and see it. Um, depending on how much notice I have that it's going to be there, because the trains can get more expensive depending on how how far in advance you book them. But it's like an hour train ride, hour and 20-minute train ride from Philadelphia to New York. So it's not a bad deal. So I'm kind of been wanting to see some of these if they ever get the premieres. But it seems like most movies, like you said, it seems like L.A., Atlanta seems to be another area. I think that's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
like
Atlanta seems to get quite a few as well. I'm hoping
yeah.
this, yeah, because this one is, from what I understand, they're probably looking at around about 10 times as many screens as what the Renegades release was. So that might mean that some are sprinkled a little bit up on the East Coast and North as well. So maybe, it might get New York way,
Yeah,
hopefully.
that would be awesome. Yeah, because actually some movies like I know Acceleration, that Daniel's really Dolph Lundgren movie, that actually did screen here in Philadelphia, but I found out after it had screened that it was like in the
Yeah.
Philadelphia area. So it was like maybe out in the suburbs, one of the theater, which I don't know why it was screening on one of the suburban theaters out there, but I found out after the fact. It was like one of those things where it was like um I don't remember. I think it was like a I don't know how I would have even known that it had screened there after. I think it was one of those things where it was like IMDb was like had like a legacy link or something like that to Showtime's there, and I had missed it. So some of them do make it here to Philadelphia, but definitely would be interesting to see it on the big screen for sure.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Excellent. Yeah, and you have I know you have other kind of all kinds of movies um on Tubi that are kind of more ones where you've sort of you've written them, and but they're not kind of ones where you're like directly involved in the production of them.
No, no. So yeah, a lot of the ones on Tubi, like there's a lot of creature features and disaster films on there. Um, yeah, they're just more kind of jobs for hire. But I think, I do get interested to see how they turn out.
Yeah, and I think you were showing I one time on YouTube, or not on YouTube, on Instagram, you showed kind of a stack of some, because they're starting, some of these movies are starting to get more physical releases when they used to only be, for a while they were only putting them on like direct to Tubi or something like that, but now it seems like there's more of a market coming back, I guess, for these movies on Blu-ray.
Yes, certainly on. So I've got a few Blu-rays for some of my films. They tend to come from Germany. So yeah, over in parts of Europe, particularly Germany, actually, they still seem to value physical media quite a lot. Um, I know, there's been a lot of talk recently about a kind of new new wave of interest in physical media with collector's editions and things. Um, so yeah, I mean, hopefully it does come back, and it's kind of had its day and been done with in the UK, unfortunately. Um, but yeah, some of the bigger releases I have might still get the odd physical release over here.
Yeah, and it's interesting 'cause I've noticed like some of like the Emmett Furl Oasis films, of course they have big names, in them. But it's interesting. I'll go to like a Target here in the United States, and they'll make a very small DVD section, like maybe just like an end cap on a row in the electronics section, and I'll see like maybe like Shazam, Fury of the Gods, or Ant-Man, Quantumania, or something like that. But then I'll also see like Savage Salvation in amongst those movies. So it is interesting, I think, especially if there's a name or something like that, that like some of the bigger uh, uh, retail stores here in America will still show them, and I think it would be interesting to see if like you said, there's just sort of a return to that kind of thing where there's shelves that just sort of have more physical media, but at the same time, like Best Buy, one of the kind of the shops that sold a lot of physical media, they're kind of backing off and not selling as much. So it's kind of like a kind of a mix. But I think there are a lot of people that really like having shelves of DVDs again. And like you said, hopefully that's going to kind of lead to a bigger movement.
Yeah, I hope so. I know that there's certainly some of the curated selections and things like Criterion are growing in popularity. Yeah, they're very niche, but as yet I haven't done anything that's kind of Criterion worthy. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny because I don't know how it kind of worked in the UK, but in America, what's interesting is you had like these electronic stores like Best Buy that they sold DVDs at a much cheaper rate than like your normal like record stores and places like that, and so they essentially kind of got them, almost, they essentially ran them out of business. So like, think of like here in the United States, like Tower Records, FYE, those places, they went out of business because the electronic stores were selling at a cheaper price because they could, for them, the margin was to get somebody in the store to buy a TV. So it's like if you come into the store and buy a few DVDs, but you see the TVs over there and you decide that's where you want to go to buy your TV, it works out better for them. But then, of course, once they ran those places out of business, suddenly the DVDs weren't, so they got kind of taken out of business by like Amazon, because people were buying their TVs and things like that on Amazon more. So then now they're kind of
Yeah.
running out of business and they've stopped selling DVDs. And so in America, there's like fewer places to find them, and it's almost like you have to go to those boutique places like Vinegar Syndrome. So it would be interesting to see if like like the retailers like Walmart or Target start to pick them up again.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to see if they pick up certainly those kind of collector's editions and things. But yeah, we'll see. I think in the UK it's almost kind of dead now. So all our kind of supermarkets are kind of versions of Walmart. They've kind of most of them have kind of stopped doing DVDs altogether. The only kind of few that remain doing it, well, there's only a couple really that still do it, but they limit themselves purely to the mainstream releases. So there'll be a few Marvel and DC films there, not really anything else. Yeah, so you kind of have to go to the specialist store or you have to go online to get your stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's kind of like what we see here in America. I mean, one of the
Yeah,
interesting things is that like the dollar stores, that they're starting to sell like these sort of like these Blu-rays that are just sort of like just the Blu-ray. There's no extras or anything like that with them. And I know people are finding more of those. They'll go to those now. I don't usually go to the dollar store myself because a lot of times I travel with my backpacker when I'm out shopping, so I don't have to carry everything on the subway. And those stores don't really like it if you go in there with a backpack on. So I usually I tend to stay out of those stores. But yeah, I know people have had some success going to some of those places to find them.
yeah. I hear reports occasionally of people finding my films at dollar stores. Um, we used to have that here really, but that's kind of fallen out a little bit as well, unfortunately. Um, but yeah, we'll see with so many kind of streamers at the moment. Um, the selection everyone kind of has seems to be narrowing slightly because everyone's got their own kind of grip on something at the moment. Um, and if you're going to get every kind of streamer, you're going to be paying hundreds of dollars a month. So it's not really feasible. So yeah, maybe we'll see a bit of a rise again in physical media, hopefully.
Yeah, that's a really great point because I know we had AMC Plus for a short period because my wife is a huge fan of Mad Men, and then I ended up buying the series for her on Amazon because it was on sale, and so we've been meaning to get rid of Amazon AMC Plus, but it's like, oh, there's I want to see VFW, the film, the action film with Fred Williamson and that kind of that whole cast there, and
Yeah.
I've it's been months. It's been like, I don't know how many months that I've been like, I'm just going to watch this and then we'll get rid of the subscription. So the movie's actually costing me a lot more than it would have been if I just bought it on Blu-ray, by paying the subscription service every month to finally watch it. So like you said, sometimes when you get all these subscription services and if you're not using them, you're paying a lot more than you would if you just went out and bought the DVDs.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And increase everyone's kind of raising their prices, and even now, if you pay a subscription fee, you've kind of got to endure adverts still. So I think Amazon are kind of forcing adverts on people unless you pay a bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we might see a little bit of a boom again, but I don't know how long it'll be until we see a kind of resurrection in terms of like indie films. Anyway. Yeah. So we'll see.
Yeah, because it is still. I remember Amazon used to have, like, before they went completely to VOD with Prime. They used to have this, like, similar to with what I do with my novels, where it's like on demand publishing. They had like an on demand publishing for DVDs when people could, they put their movies on Amazon. I think you'd buy it as a DVD, and they would print it on demand the way they do with novels. But I think they got rid of that completely once Prime became the big mover for them.
Yeah, I mean that might be something to look back into. Really, I think I know some people still do on demand, certainly for like indie releases, but um, it can end up being quite costly, really. So the margins aren't that good if you're printing out so few each time.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense, and I think that's part of it, right? Is that streaming definitely helps with the margins because it's, it doesn't have to be printed and put on the shelves, and so yeah. And I know for myself, my wife and I, we have a small 2-bedroom apartment, so I can't, I see a lot of these people, I see a lot of people's collections, and they've got an entire room that's just dedicated to just walls of DVDs and
Yeah,
things like that. And I can't afford to, I can afford to do it in the sense that I could buy the DVDs, but I wouldn't have any place to put them. And so they would just be taking up just space in certain places. That's where streaming kind of is a benefit for me, because I can access a lot of movies without having to worry about, the limited space that I have in my apartment. Um, so it always kind of works out better for me that way. But then there's also that sense of, like, for example, with this movie, where I do have, a physical copy of it, and with the YouTube version being so heavily edited, it's like, you're always sort of at the mercy of what the streaming service does, whether it's
yeah,
having it up or putting it down, commercials. I mean, one of the things about when you watch a movie on TV is it was formatted to have commercials, whereas these movies aren't formatted, right? It's just sort of like wherever the streaming service decides to put the commercials in, and it could be, in the middle of a line or something like that. So there are a lot of things that physical media can do that the streamers can't do.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, hopefully the consumers will kind of realize that, and keep physical media alive.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Now, before we wrap up, anything else, Tom? Anything else that you wanted to plug? So the first thing we talked about was Cinderella's Revenge, which people can look for, like you said, probably you said in the second quarter of this year.
Yeah, I think that'll probably be my first main release this year. And then yeah, I think keep your eyes peeled for more information and more kind of maybe the first trailer for the Baby in the Basket later in the year.
Excellent. And then of course, currently, Renegades and When Darkness Falls are two that people can pick up or can catch on streamers here in the U.S. and the U.K. And I think those are both excellent movies and worth checking out. Very very different movies.
Yeah,
They're both very different, but also really enjoyable. I think Renegades. I think for people, we were just talking about the Joshua Tree, and I think the Renegades is a movie that tries to kind of harken back to that period, in the Joshua Tree, and I think it's a really fun actioner that people should check out.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, that one.
Yeah, yeah, and then of course When Darkness Falls is kind of more of a slow burn suspense thriller, but definitely worth checking out as well. So I think depending on what you're in the mood for, you've got one or the other to that can if you're in the mood for an actioner, straight ahead actioner, Renegades is more there. But if you're looking for something kind of more suspense, more of a thriller, When Darkness Falls is a great one as well. All right, excellent. Well, yeah. So at this point, Tom, I don't have anything else. So thank you for coming on. This was a great conversation. It's a fun movie to discuss for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me on.
And thank you everybody for listening. And yeah, we'll talk again soon. All right, bye everyone.